Hello everyone and welcome. This is Faraz here. In the last video we installed Linux on our Windows 10 Pro machine using the Linux subsystem for Windows. So today we'll be finally working on Rails, but before we do so we'll install the various dependencies before we get started. So before installing Rails we need to install Ruby, and that is the base programming language for Rails to work on. And before installing Ruby we need some things that Ruby does need. So first of all is a JavaScript framework that is not required by Ruby, but it is required by Rails. A C compiler and a C++ compiler, because Ruby was initially implemented in C, so it is important that we give the compiler for it to work. And some other dependencies like zlib and OpenSSL and whatnot. So we'll begin by updating our repositories. So we'll type sudo apt get update. It will ask for the password. Now this is the Linux password that you set in your earlier video, and I told you to be careful while setting it. So go ahead and put in your password, and it will go ahead and install update. Give it some time, as it does require to update a lot of softwares that are not yet updated on the subsystem version of Linux. Now once it has been updated, we'll install curl. Chances are that it is installed by default, but it's good to have it. So curl is now installed, and the reason I installed curl is because I wanted to install Node.js, and it's best to install Node.js from its own source rather than relying on the apt ones, which may or may not be updated. Next up, we'll install curl for Yarn. Now, Yarn is a resource negotiator which may or may not be used in this course based on the requirements which we have in our future, but it's good to have a resource negotiator to begin with. So now we have updated our apt guest repository, so we will have to update it so that the URLs that we have added, it goes on and updates them for us. So we'll type sudo apt get update once again. So now you can see it has started connecting to Yarn, and it has started connecting to Node, which is good. So now we're ready to install all our dependencies. So they are going to be git code, GCC, zlib, Node, and everything. So I'll type in the command for you, and don't worry, these will be there in our description for you. It takes a bit of time because we're installing over 10 softwares, so bear with me for some moment. Alright, so we have got all our softwares installed. Now we'll go ahead and install our database for our application. We'll be using MySQL here, so I'll go ahead and install the MySQL server. Say yes. So MySQL has now been installed. Now on your system you might have gotten a prompt saying that MySQL wants to access public and private networks on your Windows PC. So it's okay to allow it, because we'll be trying to connect to our database from our local network as well as from the host machine, that is the local host. So once MySQL is installed, what we need to do is we need to do a secure installation and secure the root user, so that only once you're logged in as root, you might be able to log in into root in MySQL as well. So we'll go ahead and type MySQL secure installation from sudo. So it's asked for your root password. Now this is the same password that I told you about the Linux installation. Go ahead and put it. Press enter. All right, so we see that we have gotten our first error, that is can't connect to my MySQL server through the socket. Now it's important that you take a good look at this, as you will be needing it in our further courses. So I'll copy it and I'll save it somewhere, and I'll also be asking you to do the same. So now this error occurred because MySQL server, though it got installed, it's not running. So in order to start it, we need to write the following command as sudo service mysql start. So we see that it is showing starting MySQL database. So MySQL database has been started. So now we can type our older command, that is MySQL secure installation. So now it asks you for whether you want to have a plugin to validate password component. Basically, it is asking that should you be prompted for secure and other passwords. So for this course, I don't think that it's required. So I'll go ahead and type no. So it is asking for a new password for the root user. So go ahead and choose a secure password for your root user. All right, so now it is asking for us to remove anonymous user. So it's safe to remove anonymous users. So we'll go ahead and give it a yes. Disallow root login remotely. So what it is saying is, do you want the root user to be logged in from other computers, or you want it to log it from some other user? So I think it is safe for our example. So I will choose no here. Remove test database and access to it. That is good. We can remove that database as it is not required. So we'll choose yes here. Now it is asking it to reload the privilege table. Now this privilege table is the table that contains the list of users and their access rights. So by default, root has got all the access rights, followed by any other user that you create, and the root has the right to give other users the rights to do something on our database. So we'll choose yes here. So now it is showing that all done. So I'll try to log in as my root user. So to log in as a root user, you need to type sudo su. So now I've been logged in as the root user, and you'll see that my this dollar symbol has changed to a hash. That is the representation that you are logged in as root. So if I type MySQL now, I'll be logged into MySQL as the root user. So what I want to do now is to create a separate user for our database to be accessed through Rails. So I'll type the following query, that is create user Rails at the rate localhost. If yeah, so this is the query, create user Rails at the rate localhost identified by password. Now this is the default password that I have chosen for Rails. So I'll let it be password, as it's much more simpler to remember. Now this user is created, but the Rails user does not have access to do anything. So I'll try to grant all my privileges of root to Rails so that it is easier to create and test databases. So this is the query, grant all privileges to star dot star, that is the first star is all the databases, and the next star is all the tables in those databases to Rails at localhost. So we have granted that permission. So we can exit out of MySQL now, and we can exit out of the root user. So let's try logging into the MySQL console through the new user that we have created. So the command is mysql dash u root, dash u rails and dash p, telling it to prompt for the password. So it is asking us to enter the password, and if you remember in the query above, the password is password. So I'll go ahead and type password, and I have been logged into MySQL. So let's fire some queries. So let's see how many databases are here. So I'll type show databases semicolon. So I see that there is an information schema, there is a MySQL, there is performance schema, and these are the following. Let's try to create our own database to see if we have the privileges that we were discussing earlier. So we'll type create database, let's say Rails, create database Rails. If we see the show database now, we see that Rails has been added. To use a database, we can type use Rails, that is the database name, and now it says the database has been changed. So we are sure that our user has the privileges to create a database and he has the privileges to use them. So we saw that MySQL was successfully installed and we had our first database and our first user created. The next thing to do is to install the MySQL client so that our application is able to speak with the MySQL database. So for doing that, we'll be using the libmysql client dev. So this is the command sudo apt get libmysql client -dev. I'm sorry, I think I mistyped the command a bit. It should be sudo apt get install. Go ahead and type yes. All right, perfect. So now, if you have made it this far, congratulations. You have actually installed all the dependencies that are required for Ruby on Rails. Now we'll go ahead and install Ruby, and later on we'll install Rails.